Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be. I'm Michael DiMartino, very happy to be here today. It's going to be a fascinating and educational conversation. And not only that, but I think we're going to get to move the positive agenda forward as far as some solution-based things in regards to specifically the proposed Delta Tunnel and really the privatization of water in the Sacramento River watershed and also other watersheds that feed into that area. I'm also happy. I want to welcome, he's not always able to make it, but I want to welcome Bob Saunders, who has been my collaborative partner in the Sacramento River watershed project. So Bob, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great. And we're going to start off today. We're introducing our guest, and if you are speaking later, Bob, if you could have your camera on, it just it makes it a lot better. So
sure, I will for sure. Mm-hmm.
So the other day, we had the honor to meet Harry Eldridge, who has been doing water stuff for a while and is involved in community garden projects. And we had an appointment to meet him, and he had mentioned that our next guest here. And just really happy to have time here to speak with Patrick Porgans, who is I guess, the founder of Planetary Solutionists. Is that correct?
Yeah. Planetary Solutionaries, correct.
Great. Well, thank you. So welcome, and just really excited to find out more about how we can obliterate this insane proposal for this Delta Tunnel. I know you have over 35 or 40 years of work on this. So again, I really appreciate your time and much respect, and want you kind of get our feet wet, let's say, about what you've been working on and how you got involved.
This whole thing goes back about the early 1970. And we initially started in the Sacramento River Basin, which is about 26,000 square miles. And we have taken a look at what was going on with water-related issues in the streams and the rivers as it relates to water quality and for public trust resource protection. And it went from there to looking at issues such as the Delta Water Quality Control Plans, water transfers, Clean Water Act issues, endangered species, and so forth. And right now we work from the Denver, which is the Front Range, on the 100th meridian over to the coast here, up to the border of Canada and down to Mexico.
Wow.
And we've been effective in assisting clients, and we do pro bono on occasions, for people that are being more or less victimized by either the government or private entities. We use the government's own information to hold them accountable. We don't go in and reinvent wheels here. The government has a track record of employing what we call the moving target tactic. Essentially, they keep telling you they're going to do something, and yet it never gets done. Situation continues to, get worse, and people essentially that had started off with good intentions essentially have, along the way, they get compromised. The problem in the Delta is that the government has had 60 years to reconcile the conditions that have led up to what the former chairperson, Felicia Marcus of the State Water Resource Control Board, said was on the brink of an ecological disaster. We ask ourselves how that happened. How do we have all these laws that are in place to protect the public trust resources, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Port of Cologne Act, and all these, sundry of laws that are there? Why aren't these laws being enforced? Where are all these environmental groups that have been around since the 70s? What has happened there? What are they actively involved in doing? So what we did is we came back in. We essentially work with people who have a sincere interest in getting things done. We're not interested in, sitting down and talking. We want to get results, and that's what we do. We get results. So at this point, we now have issued a proposal to develop and implement a plan of action to assist property owners in the Delta, levee districts, law firms, and sincere NGOs, non-governmental organizations, in an effort to protect the social, economic, and ecological sustainability of the Delta and to eliminate the tunnels. And we were just involved in the California water fix procedure. Were you familiar with it? Are you guys familiar with the California water fix proceeding?
Yes, we attended a few of the EPA meetings, and I know they were talking about that, and also about supposedly Governor Newsom's water resilience plan. I haven't dug down into it, but I know there's been a lot of discourse about what their plans for the future, and actually what's already being implemented, whether known or unknown, funded, or kind of behind closed doors.
Well, we were involved as protestants, formally engaged in that process for several years. And eventually, what we initially said, first of all, that the protestants were not going to get a fair hearing because the Department of Water Resources sister agency is the State Water Resource Control Board. The board issues permits and licenses for both this Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation. Now, these entities, these agencies, they do not own the water. They only have a permit to use the water. It's called the usufructuary right. The water belongs to the people. So during these proceedings, we did a lot of research, and we showed that DWR and the Bureau and the State Water Resource Control Board personnel were engaged in what they call ex parte communications. In other words, they were meeting behind closed doors. And they were discussing issues as it pertained to what was going to be said at the proceeding. That's illegal. So we blew that open, and then shortly thereafter, because there was a whole slew of lawsuits that were filed by numerous water agencies, even the county of Sacramento and other counties, because the meetings had become tainted. You understand? In other words, they would have to divulge everything. So the next thing that happened was shortly thereafter, this new Governor Newsom comes out and says he's going to do a single tunnel. So we knocked the double tunnel out. I worked on every proposal that the Department of Water Resources has put up there on the board or on the screen since the 1970s.
And that goes back before Governor Jerry Brown, of course, right? There's a long history of how they've been trying to manipulate and privatize the water, correct?
No, that's correct. And what we have here is a situation where most people don't understand the significance of, what water resources means here. Water resources is like white gold. That's what we're talking about here. Okay. Whoever controls the water controls the land. Whoever controls the land controls the legislature. Whoever controls the legislature controls the whole socioeconomic base that's here in California.
Life itself, right?
Amen. So what we're saying now is that we went back and took a look at how much water is being transferred. Transfer of water makes a lot of money. We're talking a multi-billion-dollar business here. And there's very little tracking of who's getting what water. We did get access to a pretty comprehensive compendium of information on water sales in the West going back to the 80s to the 90s up until 2000. And that information was taken down, no longer available. People should understand that the water that these projects, the Central Valley Project, the federal project, state water project, the water they provide, which is the public trust resource, they do not, the contractors who receive the water from these projects pay absolutely nothing for the water. You got that? Zero. Don't pay for the water.
Wow.
What they pay for is the cost for the construction of the project, the O&M, the bond debt and so forth and so on the state level. The state level, the State Water Project was sold under the premise that it would pay for itself. We had a series of hearings before the state legislature back in the 1990s after I had completed 12 fact-finding reports showing that project was not paying for itself, never would pay for itself. And what they initially did here is they took money. At one time in California, if you lived in California, you were able to go to any university tuition free. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Mhm.
At any rate, the money that was used for paying that tuition came from revenues that was the result of the sale of Tideland oil down at Long Beach. Okay.
Mm.
So what they did is they took the money that was going into the education, so these people wouldn't have to, these students wouldn't have to pay all this money, in which they come out of school in debt. They put it toward the water project.
Oh.
Hundreds of millions of dollars that went into the project. And that was keeping the project financially afloat. We stated that that project was going to have problems by 1985 to 1990. And then we based that on the increasing demand for the water by the contractors because they didn't need all the water to begin with, especially in Metropolitan Water District. So, and there's what's happening now is that the Delta is, we view it as the sacrificial lamb and the golden goose.
Wow.
I'm making a fortune off of that Delta. And it's been going on for too long. And everyone, you may have had done some research, you and Bob, to look at who's been involved and what they've been doing down in that Delta. In 1994, they came up with what they call the Bay Delta Accord. This particular accord was going to be the be and end all to everything. It was going to resolve all the problems that they've had in the Delta heretofore. In 1992, they passed the Central Valley Project Act, which would be for the purpose of making up for the impacts, purportedly for the impacts associated with the Central Valley Project. And they were going to double fish populations, salmonids, and so forth. That never happened. It's been a complete failure. Then they had CalFed, a consortium of about 25 different agencies, state and federal. They spent over $6.5 billion coming up with ways that they were going to, mitigate or come up with means by which they would have adaptive management programs. The only thing with adaptive management programs is they never come to fruition.
And a lot of these finances, this is money from taxpayers, these are subsidies. How does that work as far as, how they're continuing to channel so much money into these privatization projects?
Basically, what's happening on the state level is they issue general obligation bonds. The general obligation bond is a bond act where, they may say, okay, Clean Water Act, let's spend $6 billion on clean water. Okay, so they bring it to the voters. Now, who doesn't want clean water?
Right.
Okay, so anyway, the point being that I went back and did a complete review of the Clean Water Act going back to the 1970s up until the present, and showed that all the money that was spent on the Clean Water Act, in particular here in California, the water quality in California is worse now than ever before. Okay, based on the data. We have all that data.
Mhm.
Getting back to the issue where this bond money comes in. The bond money is approved by the voters. First of all, it's initiated by the water contractors, the big landowners. They push these bond acts so this way they can get subsidies. The money that's being used, like for example, the 6.5 billion I was talking about, occurred between 2006 right up until just a few years ago. Every dollar we borrow with the general obligation bond, we have to pay $1 in interest. So we're looking at about 13 billion.
Huh.
This money's coming out of the general fund in California.
Yeah.
That means you and I, and whoever's children, their grandchildren, are going to be paying this debt off. for, infinitum. And we found when we had big budget cuts under the Brown administration, when they were cutting social service programs, in-house, care and all the rest of that, they were doing that so they could reduce the amount of debt that they had issued in general obligation bonds, pay that debt off, and then issue more water related, clean water related bond acts. What that did is it then supplemented the water needs, so-called, for the fish. We spent between 2000 and 2006, $500 million buying water for fish. Now,
Which sounds good in the greenwashing, slogan of it, but I'm sure what's happening with the reality of it probably didn't even have any success or impact, correct?
we sent a FOIA and a Public Records Act request asking for all the QA and QC data. There was no data. There's no one that can say that we even saved one fish. So what they were saying is, yeah.
They mustn't have included the accounting in the $500 million budget.
Well, yeah, again, this is all being perpetrated by the Department of Water Resources, Department of Fish and Game, and to some extent, the federal fishery agencies, although they're not as bad. But coming back down to what we're saying, if you're illegally exporting or, diverting water, the State Water Resources Control Board will come after you. Okay, it will come after you, which is what they did in the Delta, at the request of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and Westlands Water District. Okay, Westlands Water District is contracted with the Central Valley Project, and the Metropolitan Water District, by and large, is a state water project contractor. So what's happened there with regards to violating the law, during these drought periods, we found that DWR and the Bureau empty out the reservoirs in the north. And in the early years of the droughts, what they do
just go back for a second. They empty them out by just letting the water run out to the ocean. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is they increased their deliveries in the early years of the droughts.
Extract it.
Then they drop those reservoirs down where you don't have a lot of carryover storage.
Right.
So the problem then becomes, they go back to the state board and they say, look, we don't have water to meet the Bay Delta water quality standard.
Right.
Okay. You got that?
Yep.
Okay. So that what that means is then you reduce the impacts, you enhance the impacts on endangered species and water quality for Delta water users. So during, for example, the 1987 to 1992 drought, when they were delivering more water in the first 3 to 4 years of that drought, in 1991 and 1992, DWR and the Bureau violated the terms and conditions of their water right permits on 218 separate occasions in the Delta. They illegally exported about 500,000 acre feet of water. That water was worth $29 million on the market, on the water market. So getting back to all of this, and then we had the CVPIA, the Central Valley Improvement Act in 1992, which the Enviros went along with by and large, the majority of them, and they were going to provide 800,000 acre feet of water, purportedly for, doubling salmonid populations. Well, we took 3 years, a whole lot of FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request to get the information, associated with where that water was, how much water was actually being released for fish. Is that a good question? Okay.
Yep. Very good question. Yep.
So it turned out 3 years later, the 800,000 acre feet that was purportedly set aside for the fish doubling, anadromous fish doubling population, 400,000 of that annual 800,000 never left the reservoir. It was always retained in the reservoir. The other portion, up to 400,000, and again, these numbers are theirs, they're not mine. When I say they're theirs, they're the federal government's numbers, shows that when the water got passed, if it was being released from Shasta and it got to River Mile 165, Sacramento River Mile 165,
Mhm.
for either temperature or flow requirements. But once it got past that point and it went downstream into the Delta, then the federal government could suck that water up at the pumps. Now we have data that shows over 1 million listed ESA species are killed annually at those pumps. So the next question we wanted to know is how many times has the federal government enforced the provisions of the Endangered Species Act as it relates specifically to violation or unauthorized take of a listed salmon species? Okay,
Yep.
the answer, never.
Yeah, 0. Yep.
So the problem is,
Yeah.
if you go out and you have a feather that fell off an eagle, and you're caught with that feather, that's a federal offense.
Hmm.
So here we have this, selective enforcement issue going on. Then what these enviros and the rest of these people do, they file these ESA lawsuits. It goes to court. You get some judge down in Fresno that says, okay, we're going to curtail, the pumping. Well, during those times when they relaxed the standards, because they emptied out the reservoirs in the north, and they set a limit on how much could be pumped, they actually exceed the limit which can be pumped and take more water out than they're supposed to take out, and they're not held accountable. Okay, so who's monitoring these people? Who's actually knows how much water is being pumped? Have you done any research? Have you guys done any research to see who's giving us the numbers on the pumping?
Well, it's kind of like, how do you call the police on the police?
Who's
And,
guarding the
no.
guardians? Yeah, nobody's watching.
And
Right.
it's interesting because Bob and I spent some time with Nikki, who's a boat captain in the Delta.
Mhm.
And as we traveled around some of the different waterways there, she said in one place they actually believe that there's underground siphons that are drawing water out of the Delta without people in the region actually being aware of this. She said actually years ago that even a scuba diver or a snorkeler had got sucked into one of these intakes. So do you know anything about that? Because when we do go around and we've taken a lot of video in the Delta and we've talked to a lot of people, and of course a lot of the farms there do have ways to get water out of the watershed to the fields. But do you know anything more about these like supposed unknown siphons that are being utilized to drain billions of gallons of water out of the Delta?
Well, I'm not particularly familiar with that. I have heard rumors, but I've never actually researched it. But what I would say is just look at how much water they're actually pumping that's going through the pumps. Okay, let's look at that.
Mhm.
So how do we know when they say they're only pumping X cubic feet a second
Right.
or X acre feet of water? How do we know that? We have to depend on the exporters, on DWR and the Bureau of Reclamation to give us those numbers.
Right.
The State Water Resource Control Board doesn't do that.
Hmm.
That's up to the operator of the project. So if the operator of the project says it's X, well, how do we know it's X?
Mhm.
Nobody knows what it is.
Right.
So again, it comes back down to they're focusing on going after people in the Delta, saying that they may be exporting water or diverting water that doesn't belong to them, when in effect, DWR and the Bureau is taking water and we don't know how much they're taking.
Mhm.
So the issue comes right back down to a fundamental issue. The state of California, since 1970, I have been asking them to do what you call a water rights adjudication in the Delta. And by doing that, then we would have a better idea of how much water is in the system and who has what rights to what water. They've avoided it like the plague. I never wanted to know, because that gives DWR and the Bureau more latitude to do what they've been doing all along. So I suggested we go in and start monitoring these guys and use this equipment that's available and find out what they're doing. And then take action to hold them accountable.
Mhm.
The problem that you have here, again, everybody wants a seat at the table, so to speak. And they want to sit down and compromise. So this bond money that we're talking about, these billions of dollars of bond money, and it was this guy, Jerry Merrill. I don't know if you ever heard of Jerry Merrill.
I know who Jerry is. I've met him before. Yeah.
Okay, you
Yeah.
know Jerry, okay?
Yeah.
Jerry used to be a deputy director at DWR. He was also an economist with EDF back in the 70s, okay?
Mhm.
He had a bond act a couple of years ago for $11 billion. Huh?
Mhm.
Another Clean Water Bond Act. And Resnick and Boswell and all those people down in the valley were funding his program. Fortunately, the Sierra Club stepped in and they stopped it.
Mhm.
They stopped that bond act. Now, if they got that bond act through, you and I wouldn't even be sitting here talking, because then they would have all the money they need to pay everybody off.
Right.
So these environmental groups, not all of them, majority of them, who's sitting on the board of directors of, Nature Conservancy,
Mhm.
EDF and NRD, who's sitting on the board of directors? How about Goldman Sachs?
Right. Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo, all of the boys
Yep.
are up there. And so if you get where you get that money, you don't have to do fundraising.
Right.
So in 2008, the National Marine Fisheries Service Science Branch up here in the north said that the salmon collapse was the result of ocean conditions. Huh? I don't know if you remember that. So I came in and I said, okay. I sent a FOIA request up to, the NIMS and to the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Right.
I need the QA/QC data to show that this was in fact, ocean conditions that brought that damn species down.
Mhm.
So 6 months later, going back and forth, one FOIA act after another, they finally conceded. No, well, we didn't know for sure, because there's about 46 different parameters and so forth and so on. But they said, now that you brought this to our attention, Porgans, we're going to look at it. I said, the best thing you can look at is yourself in the mirror and get a paper saying you're resigning your position because what you've done has violated the public trust. Then I went to all the big environmental groups with my 79-page, 60-day notice that has 10,000 pages of documents to support my position that the trust resources had essentially been given away. They told me, this is what they told me, and this is that group, that biodiversity.
Mhm.
Actually, this is an excellent piece of work, but it's too involved for us. We're going to continue listing species. Huh? So what does that mean? Let the fish die so we can go out and generate money.
Mhm.
Now that we have all that bond money, this keeps coming back, that the Resources Agency, the California Water Commission, DWR, all these people. You remember Lester Snow?
Yep.
Oh, Lester boy, okay? Snow Job, I called him. Snow Job, he was in position of determining who's going to get what money. Huh? Now he's out of the government, segment. He's now in the private sector.
Mhm.
The last I heard, now it may have changed because it's been about a year or so, maybe a little longer. He was sitting on a nonprofit group and he was going to determine who's going to get what money from the Bond Act. Huh? So what does that tell you? So everybody's on the gravy train. So why save the Delta?
Right. Yep.
If you can milk that Delta, to the utter delight, and I'm talking UDDER udder, they're stuck in the way at the tip of that udder,
Yep.
and they can't get enough. So I have a 7-point proposal here. My economist, who's a former economist for the Department of Water Resources, he's a G14, government G14 from the Bureau of Reclamation. We have the plan. We have the means and wherewithal to shut them down and put that tunnel where it belongs, back in the closet, or in the shredder would even be better.
So I did have a couple questions, just kind of elaborate a few areas. And this is really fascinating. As you know, there's so many. I mean, I live in Nevada County right now. We have almost 400 nonprofits, and a lot of them are competing for the same dollar. So a lot of times, these organizations have very high-paid staff, where not much of the fundraising that they actually do goes into the cause. It goes to pay a staff of people, and and righteously so, people should be paid. But it's interesting to see the dynamic of how much people are paid, how much is being done with education and research, and how much actually goes back into the original cause. So I think more and more we're seeing behind the it's kind of like when they pull the curtain back in the Wizard of Oz. We're seeing behind the curtain and how much greenwashing and whitewashing and lack of really awareness or oversight that the general public has about how these things happen behind closed doors. So it's a fascinating time to see this happening on many different levels, and also to have a conversation with you. But I do want to talk a little bit about a couple things. I recently had a discussion with Frank L. Curry, and he used to be a senator from Pennsylvania. He has been very involved in politics in Pennsylvania, and actually successfully wrote an amendment to the state constitution in direct response to the amount of contamination and abuse to water that was being done by the coal mining industry. So, kind of looking towards things we can do. And you have the data, which is great because, it's like the ability to reflect back these statistics information about how they're misappropriating the funds and what they're doing. But I guess my question is, isn't there some other things we can do for people that want to help get involved in the movement, like potential legislational things around constitutional amendments to protect the water? Or is that just another, potentially dead end road? And at some point, I would like to engage in a conversation with Frank, but a great guy. He was doing environmental work, actually in the late 60s and 70s, even before the whole Earth Day concept kind of came to fruition. But I did want to ask you, what's the potential of doing and Bob Saunders might want to comment on this, on some sort of constitutional amendment in California as a protection for waters, because we know water is a human right. And not only doing that, but also the ability to kind of just get more people aware and engaged of how they can be part of this process.
Let Bob go first.
Yeah, well, let me just give my summary of legislation type things. When you have whether ordinances or any type of legislative decree, it's only as good as it's implemented, but even more importantly, it's only as good as it's enforced. And essentially, so much of it is done behind closed doors, and the word is all like legalese, legislativese, that the average person in public has no understanding of what it means. And if a spinmeister for the legislature or a corporation who's behind it, because they made sure it got watered down, no pun intended, to the extent that they allowed it to go through, essentially what happens is they'll tell the public exactly what they know the public wants to hear to make it look like something's being done. It's similar to what Patrick said about the fish. They would have their spinmeisters go out there and said, we're saving the fish. So a lot of environmentalists will say, great, oh, we're so happy about it. But they did absolutely nothing, and there's no measurement and, of course, no accountability to know exactly what was done, if anything. But it sounded good and made people feel good about it. And so you had a lot of these inside groups, a lot of the insider environmental groups that basically sit with our enemies and our opposition, the people who destroy the environment. And they feel good because they sometimes settle for crumbs and they feel like they're really making a difference, when we believe, Patrick, and I'm right there with you, that we're at a point where we don't want to sit and talk anymore. We don't want to go to meetings. We demand that you do this to protect our environment. It's not your environment. It's our environment. It's our water. It's our land. We're the stewards of it. You are the destroyers of it. And essentially, but it's the same thing with legislation. In a sense, I always say, I believe often that nothing's going to change until we can get the politicians and corporations on the same side. But why would they be on the same side when they're motivated by greed? And And the same thing with pumping water. Nestle's does this, Crystal Geyser. Nobody knows how much water they're really pumping. Like, are they going to say, well, we've pumped 350, 1,000 gallons of cubic feet of water today, we must stop? No, they're going to take as much as they can. They'll take as much as they can until they run out of water. And then they'll pull up stakes and go somewhere else, leaving places like, like in Pennsylvania, high and dry when they drained an aquifer. And that's not the only place those kind of things have happened. So it's very difficult. The answers are not easy. It's a fight, but it's a fight that's well worth it. And I believe like things like Patrick is talking about, it's really important. You have to lay out the plan for them. In a sense, you have to hit them with a proverbial 2x4 of the plan and then say to them, well, this is an ultimatum. This is what it is. And then if they kind of stonewall you, which often they do, or they kind of say, yeah, oh, sure, we're very interested in this. Well, we'll talk about, we'll have to set up a committee to talk about it, which they always do. I know you're laughing, Patrick, beneath that mask. And then what happens is, then we have to take to the streets. That's why I do direct action. That's why I have a lot of friends that do that. We know that, we tell groups, point to us, the insider groups, like tell them, oh, they're crazy, those guys out in the street. Oh, you can't deal with them, but you could deal with us. And we always tell them, ask for more. Don't settle for crumbs. You demand what we're demanding, do it on the inside, and tell them we're not going away until you do this. And then if you don't want to do this, great. Then we're gonna go over and we're gonna increase the participation of all those groups out there that don't want to deal with you but will constantly put pressure on you. They'll cost you money, and they'll get more and more people. They'll inform the taxpayers, and you will have the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. You will have your position threatened and lose all that money and power that you now have, which is really what is necessary. That's what it comes down to. But it's a long haul in that way, but it starts with the kind of things that Patrick is talking about. He's basically he's providing oversight and holding them accountable.
I couldn't agree with you more, Bob. Very good synopsis of what we're faced with here. See, what's the problem is we're reacting to these moving targets. We'll get another plan. We'll get another committee. And then they take all these has-beens, you know what I mean? Nothing personal. I don't mean anything personal, right? Because if a person makes a decision that they want to be, how would you say it? Without morals or, without integrity, that's their decision. However, when that decision they make impedes our right and imposes on our public trust resources, that's the time we have to step in. They are only the trustees. We are the ones that own it. Okay. So now we have to come back and not go in there with bended knee. We have to go in with a proactive plan of action of our own. You've had 40, 50, 60 years to resolve this problem, and you haven't resolved it. You are the problem. How can we expect the government to come up with solutions to a problem when there's a problem?
Well,
Time's up.
I think you hit on a great point too, because from Bob and I doing the water protector tour for 3 years, going all the way from Mount Shasta, where of course the Winnemem Wintu are fighting for the protection of salmon in their watershed. And then recently Trump was kind of threatening to raise the dam, which would have had devastating impact on the local watershed and some of the cultural and heritage sites up there. Some of the EPA meetings we've been to, where even people as far up as the Klamath River were showing up about the negative impact of what's happening with the draining of water from the Sacramento River Basin area and watershed. And more we're seeing things with like horrific algae blooms based on water temperature, based on farm runoff, all the various toxins that are getting in the water. So I don't think, and Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, the 50 people we've interviewed in the Delta, heritage and legacy farm owners, people from the Chamber of Commerce, business owners, members of indigenous tribes. And I don't think we've ever found someone who is actually for this proposed Delta tunnel. Would you say that's accurate, Bob?
Absolutely accurate. Not one person. And the fact that's really fantastic about some of the people we interviewed, a lot of them have ideas for alternatives to the Delta tunnel. And of course, some of them definitely are workable. And, you know, what amazed me about that was it really demonstrated to me that all those meetings I went to, the protests that I went to, and everything like that, the powers that be who sit at that table at the EPA building when DWR has their meetings aren't listening worth a damn to anything anybody has to say. It's really, it is a dog and pony show. It's really exemplified by the fact is how rigid they get when you castigate them. And I've done that myself there. And several other people have as well, including indigenous people, water experts. Dan Baca was there, people from the Delta, and just about everyone has offered alternatives right there, right on that spot. You couldn't miss it. And there's never been a comment by them, you know, we'll explore that idea. They don't even talk about set up a committee or whatever. It's a done deal where it's a listening session that we're here to listen to what you say. And then the truth about it is all they need to add is ... And then we're going to ignore you because we have our marching orders and that's what we're going to do. But wherever you go, I haven't met anybody that's for the Delta, especially the people down there that live there. And even on the periphery of the Delta, there are people there that they totally know about it and they're not for it. They said, well, that sounds like a stupid idea. Why would they suck all that water out of there? You know, it's not a good environmental thing to do.
And it's interesting because we had interviewed some of the people there from Audubon Society declined to do an interview. Nature Conservancy declined to do an interview. I think we got two good ones with the Sierra Club. Right. But it was interesting to be down there and to see the horrific impact, not just on water quality, but also on the impact of fish populations. And I know a big, props to Dan Baca from Fish Sniffer magazine and his incredible work as a journalist and what he's doing to kind of expose the impact of fish populations, but also what's happening to the salinity of the area and also what's happening with a lot of the wildlife, the cranes and some of the unique, the Sacramento River Delta is one of the biggest and most unique estuaries in the world. And it's actually the key and catalyst for the whole salmon, at least salmon and fish population of the West Coast of how they come into San Francisco Bay and go upstream. So, there's a lot of impact there, but my question is, why should people care about, it's 1 million cubic feet, it's 10 million cubic feet. Well, it doesn't affect me. This is like a water war. And of course, we know in the last year that the Chicago Exchange also made water now one of the most valuable commodities to be buy, sold, and traded globally. And we can see the horrific impact that's happening in a lot of sub-equatorial countries where people are actually losing their water. They're being drained dry by people like Coca-Cola and others. Mm-hmm. But I would like to, just propose this provocative question, like, why should people care, especially when people say, well, Southern California needs more water, they need more lawns, they need more car washes, population's exploding, we need more water. And I know a lot of water doesn't reach there. Also, we know that over 3,500 small farms were shut down this year because of the supposed drought and other state mandates. But again, both for Bob and for Patrick, why should people care? How does this affect them, both in maybe their taxes, but in the environment, quality of life, and California's water future?
Well, let's put it in, simple terms. Most people are preoccupied just trying to sustain their life. Okay, they don't have time to go out and find out about all these things that are impacted. Why should they be concerned about their water supply? Well, first of all, in the last several years, during these so-called horrific droughts, these droughts of biblical proportions, I went back and looked at all these droughts, okay? I looked at the biblical aspects of it. I went back thousands of years, okay? First and foremost, the State Water Resource Control Board issued a mandatory cutback in the M&I, municipal and industrial sector. In other words, if you were getting 1,000 gallons of water a month, you would have to cut back that by 25%. Okay? So what happened next was you would be charged more for less water.
Wow.
You're paying more for less water. And they're doing it again. And they did it back in 2009. So they keep making the M&I people cut back, while agriculture, which consumes about 85% of the state's water, 85% of the water. And it's
Wow.
estimated there's about 29 million acre feet of water that's actually used in California annually. That's not counting all the groundwater, because we don't really have a handle on that. But in other words, on an average year is quote unquote average, because there's really nothing such as average, but they average out the water years based upon data going back to 1906. So they come up with a figure 200 million acre feet of water in an average year falls or precipitates here in California, of which 125 million of it goes to evapotranspiration or goes back into the ground. So you're dealing with roughly 70 million acre feet of water. If the net amount of water you're using, and that's applied to both the M&I, municipal and industrial, and agriculture, is 29 million acre feet, and that's not counting how much water we're taking from the ground. Well, we have more water than we actually use. Unfortunately, a portion of that water that occurs is in the North Coast. And most of that water runs off. But even when you take all that into consideration, you're still not, you don't really have a water shortage here in California. What you have is a misappropriation of water. For example, from 2012 to 2016, we did research. I do what we call fact-finding forensic reports. Okay?
Wow.
And what we do is we went back and showed that in case of almonds alone, almonds, whatever you want to call them, they were putting in, during this 2012 to 2016 period, 60,000 new acres of almonds a year. There were no restrictions or mandatory cutbacks on agricultural water use. None. All voluntary. So if you take that 60,000 acres of almonds times the number of years, we went from 400 or 600,000 to over 1 million acre feet of almonds in that period. So then we ask ourselves, how much of that, how much water is almonds using? Is that a good question?
Excellent.
All right. So we found out that they're using, now these are conservative figures, okay? I mean, I only get them from the Department of Food and Agriculture, which has been, renamed Department of Food and Gag, okay? The figures that we got is 3.7 million acre feet of water for almonds alone. So let's put that in perspective for a minute. How does that relate to what the Metropolitan Water District, which is the largest municipal water district in the United States, how much water are they providing to their 19 or 20 million customers? How much? It turns out that historically, if you went back in, say 5 or 7 years ago, they were averaging 2 million acre feet a year. That's all, 2 million. Now, if you look at their annual report for the Metropolitan Water District, their budget, it shows it's 1.3 now. So they cut back. So the almond, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be derogatory here, but there's one man who owns 26.7 square miles of almonds. 26.7 square miles of almonds. That's not even
Which the majority of those actually go out of the country, to no benefit to U.S. citizens, correct?
Yeah, about 80%.
Right.
Go out of the country.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm asking a question. Now, I'm all for nuts, okay? But I think this one guy's gone nuts with the nuts. You know, the guy down there.
Is that Resnick or no?
Yeah, Resnick and
Right.
his wife. Nothing personal. They just did what Boswell did. They did what Miller Lux did before him and
Right.
before them. They used the same plot. Anyway, let's look at how much water.
Well, it's interesting too, because what you're saying, we see how, anyone who's driven through Central Valley over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you can see all the signs saying Congress created drought, water equals food equals life. There's this huge campaign about really a lot of small farms have been shut down and affected by these water wars. But yet what you're telling us is that these huge agrogarchies, kind of like the petroleum industry, that these huge agrogarchies continue to expand production and expand wealth. I mean, I did research recently. I think latest I've seen, Resnick's up to somewhere like a $10 billion almond empire. And then we also know his wife has palm. They do the pomegranates. So again, it's just like, that the pyramid of the hierarchy of the hyper 1% who are basically making all the profit. Meanwhile, jobs are being lost, family farms are being shut down, and it's really, I mean, then we get into things like GMOs and how all these things are really affecting, Americans.
Your way of life, what's happening is your quality of life is going down and your cost of living is going up.
Absolutely.
That's what's going on here, okay?
Yeah.
And that's very simple. It's, you can see it every day. I went to the store the other day and I wanted to buy, first of all, you asked me what people could do. Me,
Yeah.
individually. I don't go in streets. I don't protest. I'm for protesting. That's going to make the difference.
Mhm.
What I'm saying is we have to make that difference individually. Now, if you go to my website, it tells you there. We don't need to join up. What we need to do is exercise our consumer rights.
Right.
One, do not buy any of their stuff. Okay?
Right.
Boycott them.
Mhm.
Don't advocate eating pesticide infested crops.
Right.
Do away with that.
Mhm.
Let's stop irrigating land that should have never been put into irrigation down there in the San Joaquin Valley. We
Right.
knew back in 1937, irrigating those soils on the west side was problematic. And when you talk about salinity problems, that's one of the major issues here.
Mhm.
That's why they want the tunnel. If you
Right.
get water from up on just as it enters the delta, that means everybody down south of there, you can use that water for agriculture, for blending, and then help to remove that salt that's been building up, selenium, molybdenum,
Mhm.
that's been building up in the soil profile, which I opposed, and everybody else went along with it. Now, let's go back to, let's stay focused here. If you say, for example, they come up with another Clean Water Act, well, I have that data. I have the fact sheets. I've got all the references. I can show you how and why the water is getting worse. That tunnel would effectively reduce the cost associated with processing the water that MWD would receive, and that would reduce the cost for treatment. That's one of the big issues there.
Mhm.
However, there's a trade-off there. And the trade-off has to come with, well, how much money are you going to put into the tunnel? Is it 20 billion? Is it 30 billion? Is it 40 billion? How much is it? So then you ask yourself, we just come up with a forensic report looking at climate change. And we're looking at the impacts that are going to occur. When I say going to occur, will occur. Okay, I got the data.
Mhm.
Unequivocally, it's all documented. And in this particular proactive plan that we have, which we're now promoting, will in effect stop it and end it. So what happened is during that drought period, again, 2012 to 2016, the water conservation efforts, according to the State Water Resource Control Board, the mandatory water cutbacks came to about 2 million acre feet of water. Huh? That's more water than the Metropolitan Water District uses in a year. And then by cutting back on the Delta water quality standards, because they emptied the reservoirs out, or, reduce the amount of storage capacity.
Right.
There was another 1.2 million acre feet of water saved, quote unquote. So I went to the state board and I said, okay, so using your own numbers, it's 3.2 million acre feet of water somehow saved. So the question then is, where's the water? Huh? Where's this 3.2 million acre feet of water? Now,
It was kind of a hot summer. Maybe it strangely evaporated, Patrick.
Yeah, like the truth.
That's a possibility, because you've got rice sitting out there in the rice fields. We got about 120-inch evaporation rate out there. Okay, do the numbers. That's 10 feet of water. Huh?
Right.
We're growing rice for who? We're growing organic dog food, organic cat food. So we're using all this energy and these water resources. We're impacting the quality of water. We're degrading the environment. We're killing the off the species, and we're shipping the stuff over to China and to India and whomever else. So why? My question is does that make a lot of sense? The only sense that makes is nonsense.
Yep.
Okay. So anyway, I asked them where the 3.2 million acre feet of water went.
Right.
So they went into this deer in the headlight. What happened?
The fish drank it.
Huh?
The fish drank it.
Yeah, that's it. They used it up. If they got them bathing in it. So my point is that what we said, they conceded that water was back and went to the projects. The projects got that water.
Right.
So now let's look at one more aspect of this, dilemma, this government-induced cabal. Huh? So my next point was, okay, so we had the 3.2 million acre feet. That water was sucked up, went to the contractors, and now we asked the question: how much water does the State Water Project provide to the people of California? Is that a good question?
Yep.
How much water? In their documents, BWR says lately 29 million, 27, 29 million. The figure keeps going up, 25,
Right.
27, 29 million Californians depend on the drinking water. Get that? Drinking water from the State Water Project. Now,
Wow.
the total amount of water the State Water Project provides on an average basis, are you ready for this? It's less than 4% of the entire water needs for the state. 4%.
Wow.
That's it. So my question then becomes, why would we, and the reason why the Delta is in the condition it's in is because the State Water Project was underfinanced in the beginning and contractually overcommitted.
Mhm.
So if you go back and look at the bulletins that they published back in the 60s and 70s, it stated right there that with the initial project facilities, which all were built, that's not including anything on the North Coast that was supplemental features, it's all been built. And they were going to depend on that and surplus waters from the Delta. Well, we ran out of surplus water in the Delta, and it was going to happen in 1990, which it did. So what we're coming back to is asking ourselves a question. Why should everybody be concerned? Well, if we spent, here's another figure for you, 50 billion on clean water. And the latest water quality control plan that was developed and approved by the State Water Source Control Board and the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, which has a lot to do with the San Joaquin Valley and the Delta, where all of that toxic water is coming back in. You ready? They've given them another 50 years to be compliant.
Oh.
50. Now, in the interim, this is all the facts. I got all this data. You want to do a program, look, I'm tired of all the rhetoric. I'm tired of the nonsense. I don't want to hear about anybody's new, I'm done. You don't need any more new laws. What you need, as Bob said earlier, and he said it very succinctly, enforce the law you have. And the Constitution provides protections under Article 2, 12, whatever the hell it is, protect those resources. What we need to do is come in and hold these individuals accountable.
Yeah.
Now, every time you sue the government, let's say I sued the Bureau of Reclamation, the Interior Department, and the State Water Resource Control, and Department of Water Resources, and the Bureau of Reclamation for illegally exploiting water. Okay. So who am I up against? I'm up against the U.S. Attorney General. I've got the.
Well, I think as you know, all these are basically corporations that are extensions of the crown that came into colonial America that was trying to escape tyranny and the taxation and the control. And in a lot of my research, I work with a lot of constitutionalists. There's also a huge movement now of countywide assemblies of people that are basically using the Constitution to show that a lot of these government agencies are just part and parcel of a larger corporation that goes back to District of Columbia, which goes back to the Vatican, which is basically just running a global control and taxation agenda where basically people are perceived as mindless cattle to help fund and fuel the machine of globalism. So, I know in our local assembly, which now has almost 400 people, they're actually using the Constitution because a lot of these people are not working within the Constitution. A lot of them haven't taken the proper oaths and stuff. So it's an interesting to look at it that way, that all of these people are actually outside of the Constitution operating these illegal corporations called, even the Federal Reserve, they put the word federal on it, but these are all really private interest corporations that are basically using the mask of government to manipulate and profiteer on the backs of Americans, of people who are here. That's why even when you go into a courthouse, they say, "Are you a U.S. citizen?" As soon as you say yes, U.S. citizenship connotates that you're part and parcel and product of this big corporation known as the United States of America, which really, as we're seeing more and more, has so little to do with the founding of the country. The genocide of the indigenous cultures, unfortunately, which has been taken out of the history books, but just the colonialization and the commodification of the new world of the United States. So it's a very interesting thing that people are waking up more and more to their rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and also that, natural resources like the right for clean air and clean water is a human and God-given right. It's not something that's doled out like pharmaceutical tablets by some sort of government control board. And I think more and more people are starting to realize this and figuring out how to take back our rights and privileges, at such a transitional time, in history.
Okay, let me comment on that if you may. First of all, we're talking about a storefront here. Okay, we're talking about revolving doors and revolving chairs. You take them from the agency, then you put them in the corporation. You take them from the corporation, you put them in the agency. Okay, they head the agencies. These people they don't know much about anything. They're reading a script, they put them in there, and they go along with whatever the script is. That's just basically it. Now, let's get back to the fundamental issue here. First of all, our whole mercantile way of living is exploitation. Okay, it's built into the manifest destiny, madhouse scenario. Conquer nature. Okay, now there's a complete oxymoron. You cannot conquer nature. It's suicidal. Okay, so what are we doing? We're committing suicide. Why is everybody going out there killing each other? They have no reverence for life. Forget about, fish. Forget about clean water. Forget about anything other than you can get a trip to Disneyland, and we'll pay you to go. Okay.
Right.
Now it all comes back. If you look through history, and I don't want to get too involved in this because we're staying focused here. We want to get back to who and what we can do. You and me, what we can do. First of all, as I said earlier, it's an individual revolution on a universal plane. That's what we're talking about here.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to exercise my rights, and I'm I don't go out there looking for things to do. I can assure you that. Did you get a screenshot of what's behind me here?
Absolutely.
You get some idea what I'm talking about here.
Mhm.
Okay, so what I'm going for here and now, I don't align myself with anyone other than those people that have a sincere interest and are dedicating their lives to what they believe and what they're entitled to, as you said before. We go back to Justinian, Roman Empire, we go back to the Magna Carta, we go back to the Constitution, or to the tribal, compact that was made back there between all the tribes.
Mhm.
What we have here is inalienable rights.
Mhm.
No one down here gave me those rights. And unless they are going to be compelled to exercise their mandates, this scenario is going to continue to go on. So let's start looking at ourselves first and then say, okay, I'm cutting back on my water. Okay. But it's my water that I'm cutting back on and I'm paying more for it and getting less to go into Resnick's almonds and his pom-pom girls, juice,
Mhm.
the juice they have. Is that good? Well, I don't believe we need to use, first of all, the largest consumer of energy in California. Do you know who it is? The Department of Water Resources.
Mhm.
They use more energy than anybody
Wow.
than
Yeah.
what they produce.
Right.
So why would I want to be paying more for my electricity? Huh? When it's a state water project, it's the people's water. It's the people's water that's going through the generators. It's the generation of that energy that's creating the power to pump that water over the Tehachapi's. We're talking about in our plan, 7-point plan here, on how we need to focus on sustainability on the local level. Okay, become as sustainable as you possibly can for all your needs, your water, your food, whatever else you got. We need to be focused there. Do you realize that since this pandemic's begun, do you try to call a government office? Most of the government, they're not in the office. They're not there. It's taken me 2 months just to get an answer to something. Well,
Yep.
wait a minute. But we got the children back in school. Now, wait a minute. Why do we have the children back in school when they can be put at risk? It has to do with the ADA, the average daily attendance. The more that they're in class, the more money the states get, just like Bob was saying. It's all about money. It's all about greed.
Yep.
So we need to examine our conscience. And on my website, Planetary Solutionaries, which I don't even keep up with anymore, I'm too busy. It explains those things, how we can then, and I wrote a book, it's called Truth, Decode It. That's decode -it, not ED. I don't want to be presumptuous like I'm the purveyor of truth. Heavens forbid, you know what they do with those guys.
They elect him president and put that in the White House and the cabinet and all that.
Whatever they put him, anyway, so my
Yeah.
point is that we understand these things.
Yeah.
Now, in the future, I'm done talking. If you guys want to do something, now you understand we're up against billionaires here. We're up against the entire US and California tax base here.
Mhm.
And if you're going to be able to do something, I don't require a lot. Okay, I don't. But you need to have a certain amount of resources and be able to effectively bring about change.
Right.
And I
Well-
believe that if you can have people feel comfortable about making changes in their lives without having to put themselves at risk,
Mhm.
they'll be more apt to do it.
Well, I think that's a big principle when Bob and I founded the Sacramento River Watershed Project, was to build a coalition of people, organizations, members of indigenous communities, and even possibly some awake people in government to start implementing and looking at solutions to some of these issues. So absolutely. And the reason we started that, and it's not even like we started as an official organization, because there's plenty of organizations out there with their hands out looking for funds and money, was to create a grassroots movement and opportunity and a platform to get people to the table to start, not to cat herd, but to assemble the lions that actually want to show up and start getting real stuff done. So that's why in our brief meeting the other day and getting a better understanding of your work and incredible, as you said, forensic fact finding over the decades is really intriguing, because it's a very powerful tool to have in our utility belt. I know a lot of what Bob and I are doing is trying to also, without wasting time to educate or wake people up who are going to stay asleep, as long as they have their next, Starbucks coffee and they can watch Netflix and, live in the bubble of their virtual world. But the idea is that was the whole platform. So I'm really intrigued on the possibilities. We have some big events coming up in 2022. Last year, we did the Water Palooza down in the Delta as a way to bring more awareness about the water privatization and issue. One of the things Bob and I also talk about is environmental toxins and contaminants, which a lot of people in the Delta wanted to talk about the Delta Tunnel, but they didn't want to talk about environmental toxins because I think there was all but one or two organic farms there. And as much as I appreciated meeting, 6th and 7th generation farmers down there, that we have to change the paradigm, even the way people are doing irrigation, the way people are watering crops. All these things have to be taken a look at, and new innovations have to come in. And we happen to, through our organization, Earthstock Foundation, we are in contact with a lot of people doing really amazing solution-based work around water remediation, around supporting regenerative agriculture. It's not about more water and more petrochemical fertilizers. It's about how you create a better environment in the soil. So again, I'm very intrigued on the potential, the fact that you have such a depth of knowledge around the water privatization piece. And I know Bob and I have been very passionate. We're working on the film Soul of the Delta, which is really just about water privatization. And then we are looking at potentially putting out another film next year, which is more related to, we're calling it Profit Over People. And it's a whole film about the contamination of our watershed. Where I live in Nevada County, 450 miles of irrigation ditches several times a year get sprayed with insane amounts of Roundup along the banks as weed control. Also, they put cutrine, which is a heavy metal, copper-based heavy metal algicide in the water. It gets into the groundwater, it gets into the drinking water. It also mixes with the toxic legacy of the gold mining industry that has happened here since 1849. They're also considering reopening up the Idaho-Maryland mine right now and draining basically hundreds of millions of gallons of water out of the aquifer that's contaminated into Wolf Creek to go down throughout the watershed and to be able to flush through the system out into the Sacramento River Basin, into the Bay Area. I mean, more and more every day we just see the insanity that comes with people being blind, where they have this anthem of profit over people. And we can really see, without looking too far, that most of the people, we call it the 1%ers, look at the Occupy movement or the cabal, whatever word people want to use for it. Thank you, sir. That there is a inhuman, non-compassionate, money-making demographic that exists that cares nothing about you, our children, our future, the environment, wildlife, and it's all about the bottom line of making those dollars. So again, I'm really intrigued of what we can possibly do. I will say, definitely interested in being heavily engaged. It was also interesting to hear some of your statistics, because I know a lot of people working on the idea of fossil water regeneration or underground water storage, and people who are looking at solutions to these so-called droughts. But as you're showing, I mean, even when we just had that huge rainstorm for days and days, none of the reservoirs seem to filled up at all, probably because they're draining them as fast as they can also. But anyway, I just want to thank you, compliment you for your commitment, your dedication, your research. It's nice to have hard facts and forensic information and not just, people's feelings or opinion, or we're going to pray on it and everything's going to magically fix itself, or we're going to put on tinfoil hats or something and meditate the change into being. It does start with each individual, but we absolutely have to get people, in the sandbox with us and getting active to help implement these solutions. So I think we're at a real turning point, and more I see people are getting aggravated. People are fed up, and people are starting to see behind, the curtain of what's really going on.
Well, I agree with everything you said, and likewise, I appreciate everything that you and Bob are doing, to try to bring about this, and this change that's absolutely essential. What we're looking at here is the privatization of the public trust resources. That's what we're looking at here now, okay? And it's well underway. It's really, and they're moving at a pace that, I can't keep, it's hard for me to keep up with them. I have to work until, 2 or 3 in the morning to keep up with this pace, because as I said, it's a moving target. Now, what I would suggest that you do, because again, you're covering a lot of territory here and a broad spectrum of issues, that affect just about everyone on the planet. So I would suggest that you go back. I sent you a copy of the proposal that we're talking about, proactive plan of action. The Delta, as you said earlier, is a very important ecosystem. It's the largest remaining estuary on the west coast of the Americas. And we've had all this time to, do what we needed to do. They failed. So now it's time to come back in and put together the plan and all of the, whatever the wherewithal to show, number one, we don't need a tunnel. Okay, that's tunnel out. It's not necessary. We can show how we can actually provide supplemental water. We can reduce the amount of impacts associated with the drainage water. We can expand habitat. We can do carbon sequestering. We can do all of these things. And we don't have to have new laws. There's already laws in place to do these things. So take a look at that. And then, you have my associates, my economist and my geotech engineer, a program just focusing on this plan and how this all can come about and why the Delta is really at, it's on the precipice of a major catastrophic disaster where $800 billion worth of assets are in harm's way and 1 million people. When, like you mentioned earlier, on the 24th of October, we had what we called an Ark Storm, okay? That Ark Storm, if had it happened during the wet season, with the ground saturated in the foothills and reservoirs, where they're in the reservoir storage, flood control storage area, the amount of water that would have been released just from Oroville alone would have wiped out most of the levee system downstream from Oroville, straight out to the Delta, wiped out most of those levees down there, and would have pushed all that debris straight down into the San Francisco Bay and will affect shipping commerce. Now, how do we know that? We know that because there were studies that were done based upon studies by USGS and others, that there was this debris flow we're talking about, and this is going to happen. So if you're building a tunnel that's going to take, 10, 12 years, at that time, they're going to be putting the existing system at risk. Huh? They're talking about, and there's another misnomer, you got to get it straight. They're saying, Department of Water Resources is saying, we're going to improve the existing water conveyance system in the Delta. Huh? You heard it?
Yeah.
There is no existing water conveyance system in the Delta. Huh? They had the money back in 1960 to provide such facilities, which were master levees. They spent the money on other projects, okay? And the problem that you have with the drainage is there were 2 master drains that were supposed to be built. One was the San Luis drain, which back in 1982, if you recall, tens of thousands of migratory birds were killed down at the Chesterton Reservoir, okay? And that was all the drainage coming back from the Central Valley Project. Then there was the State Water Project, was the San Joaquin Master Drain, which they didn't build out either, okay? So there's no solution to the drainage problem other than taking those lands out of production that should have never been irrigated. And if you take them out, you're going to save 2 million acre-feet of water. So no more talking. You want to do something, you got people that want to do something about it. Not going to take a lot of resources, a lot of money. It's going to take some resources. It's going to take some focus, and it's going to take a commitment. And with you two guys, and I have to say, you know, you seem like you're dedicated, and I'm thankful. But I don't, my opinion, just get this through in your mind, worthless. Huh? My opinion is worthless. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm not interested in anybody's opinion. I'm interested in the facts. When I was there before the Science Committee for the Delta, there's 200 scientists, and I asked them, are we going to use the F word today? Huh?
No.
Looking at each other, you know. I said, yeah, the 4-letter F word, are we going there today or not? So finally, someone said, well, Patrick, what's the F word? I said, F-A-C-T, fact.
Fact. Yep.
Are we going to be doing facts here today, or are we just back into the, you know, esoterical, asinine, you know, pseudo, whatever, you know, let's have another meeting.
Right.
That's my point. Anyway, thank you so much. Very best to both of you. And
Patrick, I just want to say thank you for sure. I mean, you know, it's an excellent tutorial, especially for people, hopefully, our listeners who know very little about this other than turning on the faucet, getting water, just as they always have, and they believe they always will. There's so much more. It's such an intricate system. It's like an industrial octopus of wheeling and dealing behind the you know, in the backdoor dealing, inside boardroom kind of things that the public never knows and the media never reports on. But I just want to let you know, whenever you're ready to present your 7-point plan, if you do it in person, I would be honored to go with you. If you do it on Zoom, I want to be on there. I'm sure Dan Bacher will be. So, you know, I have no problem standing up against these people, done it many times, cost them a lot of money. The hard part is when you're going up against government agencies, you're not costing corporations money. It's not coming out of their investors' pockets. It's coming out of the people's pockets that they're already paying for and losing, and they don't even realize it. And one thing to add about what you said about Resnick, just like Boswell, when they all get water, they then sell it back to the state for the people. And the people don't understand. In essence, you're really paying twice for something that's already yours.
thank you.
Why would you do that? It's like, you know, you own your house and it's all paid for, but then you have to pay the bank again because the bank says, well, since you own a house, we have these new laws that say you have to pay us once again because you're in the house. And you go, well, that's insane.
Well,
you know,
and that's
right.
And that's a good point, Bob, because we never really got into all the planned development through Central Valley with Bechtel. I know that's another
that would
thing.
be another conversation. Yeah,
That's another, yeah.
Right.
But we'll continue to scratch away at the veneer.
Right.
And again, Patrick, appreciate your time and getting educated. Bob and I will look at the email that you sent out to get more clear about what your plan is. And I also want to thank my partner and collaborator in the Sacramento River watershed, Bob Saunders, who now is on the board of the Erstock nonprofit, where we're going to continue to bear down and focus in on some of these issues. So thank you so much for your time. It's been extremely activating and enlightening. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick.
You're welcome.